my name is Adrian Dickill from McBride's Pride of Johnson County. And I'm here to talk about how I got started in blacksmithing and how with the proper safety precautions, materials, and working forge, you can too. Blacksmithing has been around for thousands of years and was the first form of metalworking. Be it tools, weapons, decorations, if you wanted to do something with metal, you had to know how to blacksmith. I first got interested in blacksmithing when at a Renaissance festival, I met a Russian blacksmith. The practice had been passed down through his family for generations, and I started talking to him. He told me a lot about it. He even gave me a couple introductory lessons to it, and I knew that this was just something I wanted to do. Now, the first thing you're going to need to think about if you want to start blacksmithing is safety. As you could guess, working with red-hot metal and fire is not the safest thing in the world. So first thing you're going to need to worry about is just protecting yourself from that heat. Something like a welding apron. This is a heavy leather apron that you put on yourself. So if you drop off something, like a red hot piece of metal or some flames spurt out, it'll protect your clothing and you from catching on fire. You'll need some welding gloves, which are also made of heavy leather, like this. Some big black gloves. Now these are mostly heat-proof and they will help protect you somewhat, but they're not 100% and protective. Like, if you cannot just hold a hot piece of metal with them. Over time, the heat will leach through it, and you can get burned eventually. That's why something I'm going to talk about later on, tongs are what you're going to want to use. But these will, in general, if you just brush something or if some flames shoot up again, it will stop you from getting burned instantly. You'll need a mask, something like this, a couple filters on it. With a forge, lots of debris will come up, like coal dust, smoke, metal debris, all that nasty stuff that you do not want to get in your lungs. With something like that, it'll filter the air and get the little particles out, so you just get fresh air and you protect your lungs. You'll need earplugs. Any old earplugs will do, very cheap. Just use these because hitting a piece of metal with a hammer is very loud. And you will damage your hearing over time, so you just put these in and it'll keep you safe. You need safety goggles, because when working with metal, when you put that metal in the forge, it'll oxidize and something called forge scale will form on it, just like a thin little shell of metal. Then when you hit it with the hammer for the first time, that shell will spray off in all different directions, and if it hits you in the eye, it can do some nasty damage. So you're going to want to wear these to protect yourself. You're going to want to wear jeans and organic material or clothing, because with synthetic clothing, if that hot metal touches it, it will melt and it can fuse to your skin. If it touches organic material, it will just burn. So you could still get burned, but that is much preferable to have it in surgery to get that's plastic icky material removed from your skin. And then you'll need some closed-toed leather shoes or boots, which will protect you from any hot metal that falls, or if you drop something heavy like that anvil or a hammer, your toes will not be smashed. And finally, once you have all this stuff, you're going to be able to actually start working the metal. So to do that, first you're going to need to make your forge. To make this, you're going to need fire brick as the base, which is a special kind of brick which can withstand very high temperatures to around 2,000 degrees Celsius. And the reason you can't use regular brick is because inside regular brick, there's little pockets. Water over time seeps into these pockets, and then when it heats up because of the forge, it starts to turn to gas and expand, and then eventually the brick will actually explode. I actually learned this the hard way, and that is not something you want to go through. I was fine, but it was absolutely terrifying for there to just be an explosion of brick out of nowhere. You need a bellows or a blower of some kind. Now, what this is it circulates the air through the coals, because fire feeds off of oxygen. So the more oxygen you get into these coals, the hotter it'll be. So I made mine actually out of just a hairdryer and some tin cans and eventually a pipe, which worked much better. Then you're going to need your fuel. There are 3 kinds of fuel you can use. There's charcoal, which is the cheapest fuel, but also burns the fastest and with the lowest temperature. There's bituminous, which burns somewhere in between the 3 different kinds of coals. It's like the middleman. It's very cost effective, but it also burns pretty well. It burns hot, it burns for a little while. And then there's anthracite coal, which is very expensive, but burns for a very long time and it burns very hot. So I use bituminous coal just because it's the best compromise between the two. You're gonna need an anvil. So I spent $60 on my anvil. It's a 60-pound anvil right over there. But you don't need to use an anvil. I've seen people use things like railroad tracks, pieces of rock, tree stumps, just anything you can hit the metal against and work it into a shape. It just needs to be strong enough to withstand that force, and you can use it. You need hammers. I have my 3 hammers right here. I have a 3-pound engineer's hammer, a 32-ounce ball peen hammer, and a 12-ounce ball peen hammer. These all serve different purposes. This engineer's hammer will be used for the rougher work, which is like shaping out metal and flattening it, something that you need to get a good heavy strike on. While the 2 ball peens will be used for shaping in the finer details of the metal. You're going to need your tongs. That's what I was talking about for holding the metal. There's just a long handle and then just this little place where you grab the metal. You can turn around to work it, and it's just keeping it away from your hand. So this was the hot metal. I would not be burned. It just makes everything much safer. You're going to need a file set because with that forge scale that I was talking about, when you hit it with the hammer, it can get ground into the metal that you're working with. So you're going to need to use the file to grind that out so it'll look nice. And then you can also use these to shape it. And if you're making knives, you can use it to put the bevel on the knife, which is where the knife slopes downward into the edge. You need a pipe or tin cans, which I talked about earlier, to make the blower. These will help concentrate the air so it flows better and you can get deeper into the coals. You need some rebar or scrap metal, because that's just going to be your material. That's what you're going to work, that's what you're going to hold into whatever you want it to be. And then you need an anvil stand. I just made mine out of 4x8s, or you can buy one. They are pretty expensive, so I elected to just build mine. And the cost to get started is about $200, but you can find some of this, especially if you work on a farm. You can maybe find fire brick. You can often find something to use as an anvil. And there's some optional equipment that you can use, and it's not absolutely necessary. It does a lot of the same jobs that you can do by hand, but it does it much faster and often much cleaner. You can use a metal cutting bandsaw. This can be used to just cut out shapes instead of using like the file or a handsaw to cut them out yourself. You can use metal plates, which you can, instead of flattening out a piece of scrap metal or rebar, you can trace some sort of design in it and then use the metal cutting bandsaw to cut that out. You can use the angle grinder, which does pretty much the same thing as either the files and the metal cutting bandsaw, but it's a much dirtier cut and it's not as easy to control as with the files. The belt grinder is the best alternative to the files. It does the exact same thing, just very fast and very clean. Then you can use scales if you're making knives, which is a material that you make knife handles out of. You can use things like scrap metal, but if you use scales, it'll look much cleaner. Then after you have all this stuff, then you can actually build your forge. You need to just find a small little space where you can put your forge. It needs to be out in the open. I did a little space behind my barn, and I cleared out all the leaves. I dug a little hole, stacked up some bricks, and that was my first forge. Here it is when it's finished. It's not lit yet, but you can see how the cans were attached to the hairdryer. But this first forge, it had some problems. I did go through some trial and error. As you can see in the back, it's closed. This means that the air had to come in and come out the same direction, which made it much harder to get a good amount of oxygen into the coals. And the cans didn't help much either, because it was such a wide space for the air to come through. It wasn't really any more intensified than if I just put the hairdryer up next to it. So then I created a new kind of forge called a side blast forge. As you can see, it has 2 openings on either side. The hairdryer that also had a pipe instead of just a bunch of cans taped together, so it got the air more concentrated and it could go deeper into the coals. And then it would come out the other side, so it didn't have to push its way out, and it just flowed right through, getting a lot more air through. It was much hotter. Here it is active. You can see how hot that looks. That's probably about 1,500 degrees Celsius or so. Very hot. And this is it unlit. This is the fire brick that I was talking about. It looks a little different than normal brick. You can see it's not red. It's just a very gray. It looks kind of like concrete. Here are some pictures of when I was in the process of working the metal. It's deceptively simple, but it's also somewhat difficult because of this. It's you just heat up the metal and you hammer. That's about it. But then it takes time to get used to actually getting that metal to do what you want. Because anybody can flatten out a piece of metal, but it takes time to make something that looks like something. So here, I have been working on making knives. This is one of the first knives I made, and it turned into that bottom piece. It's a World War I trench knife, and then on the top was the very first knife I made, which was just like a little chopper. And then my fourth and fifth knife became something much better. You can tell they're knives. It's another French trench knife. It's the second one I made. It turned out much better. And then a Viking sea axe. Today I've talked about how I got started in forging, and the safety precautions you'll need to take, the materials you'll need, and how you can build a forge to get started too. Are there any questions?
So on the knives you showed us, this last number 4, number 5, how much time did that take?
The question was, how much time did it take to build those knives number 4 and number 5? That top one actually only took about a day for me to make. I had a lot of time. It took all day, but it didn't take too long. It was just a piece of rebar. I cut it down and shaped it. But now that bottom knife took about a week to make. I used the way I talked about earlier of taking the sheet metal and cutting out the design. So I did that with a bandsaw that I had bought. And then I had to shape it with the hammering. I had to put the handle on, put the edge on. I had to sand all that forge scale out. You can see a lot of it got trapped in there, in that top picture. But all in all, I think it was worth it. It was a good experience.
What type of material did you use for your handle in your last knife?
The question was, what type of material did I use for the handle in my last knife? That is actually just some scrap wood I found lying around. I did not have any forge skills at this point. I did not really know too much about them. So I just took some scrap wood, I glued it on, and then I sanded it off around the edges to make the actual handle.
What do you see as your future in blacksmithing?
The question was, what do I see as my future in blacksmithing? At this point in time, I'm keeping it as more of a hobby. I'm not sure if I really want it to be like my career or anything, but I do plan to stick with it for quite a while. If there are no more questions, this concludes my presentation. Thank you.